I'm at a point in life where I'm beginning to doubt things that I've said before. And one of the things is this idea of spiritual liberation. I know I've used the term, and now I'm asking myself, what exactly was I talking about? And I've completely forgotten. Because when I looked at the idea of spiritual liberation, the thought that came to me today was there is no one kind of spiritual liberation. What does it mean to liberate the spirit? Well, try to imagine that deep inside of us as human beings, there is the you. It's something that is so mysterious, you're almost dumbfounded by it. That whatever conglomeration of genes conspired to produce your personality and your way of being, and the random and maybe not random occurrences of life that have produced the you of this moment, there's only one you that will ever exist in the history of the universe. That's you. And try to imagine that this singular you that will only occur once in the history of the universe has some kind of spiritual entelechy, as Aristotle would say, meaning it's seeking some kind of fulfillment in life. It has a secret to be told. It has a way to live. And things happen that gets in its way. And try to imagine the singular thing called you that has a path that somehow the unconscious ego self, ourselves in our unconscious habits of thought, speech, emotion, speech, and behavior, that we are preventing it from its full actualization. So that thought, for me, reminds me of how important this work is. There's a one singular you that has one chance in the history of the universe to be actualized in this life and only this life. And are we the ones impeding it? Or are we the ones obstructing it? So when I think of my authentic you, authentic self, seeking to be liberated from what? Number one, just the cloudy darkness of my own being. I want to bring it out. When we lit candles, I meditated again to myself, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, the light of God is the human soul. There's a light that wants to get out. And then I know that what occludes the light are these habits of thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And we typically avoid solving the problems of negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but rather, as is the source of Lashon Hara, we just ride with it. So here's something that I want to give you two little ideas about how you can find what I'm going to call the combination, the unique combination to the lock that's locking in your authentic self. There's not one combination. There's not one technique that works for everybody, but here's a way to find our combination. One is the practice of really examining any negative thoughts. Now, I'm not a person who believes that we should never have a negative thought, because sometimes a negative thought is actually what is appropriate to a situation. If someone has done something horrible, then we should be able to say what they've done. But I'm thinking of the negative thoughts that take a fact and give the worst version of it. That take a fact and give the worst version of it, when in general, in our day-to-day lives, there's a better version. Now, one thing that we tend to do when our ego self is trying to take care of itself, we look at a fact, and one thing the Yetzer Hara does, it makes a claim to omniscience. Not only do we know what someone did, we know their reasons for it. Now, one thing are attributing reasons, this omniscient understanding of the inner life of another person, it makes us safe by not having to look at ourselves. So think about this. Whenever you have a negative thought, and again, I'm not saying I don't live a realistic life, but I'm really on guard for negative thoughts. And a judgmental thought comes up, and I think to myself, well, is there another way to say it that's factual but more generous. Factual, but more generous. I'll give you a tiny example. I don't like to tread too deeply into political waters, but this is an example in front of us. The new minimum wage law, there's been a great debate. Some people said it's going to make businesses shut down, which apparently it has. Businesses are going to move out of state. They're going to raise prices. Inflation occurs. Whom does it really help? Only a small number of minimum wage workers are actually benefited by this. There's a large number that aren't benefited by it. Let the free market work it out. That's what I'm going to call a kind of a center conservative point of view about minimum wage law. And there's another side that says, we don't know what to do with people who don't make enough money. It's really a problem. People can't make a living. And sometimes when people just can't make a living, the people have to assert themselves and say, we're going to try in some way, maybe not the best way, maybe not the most total way, but in some way to benefit people's lives. And the conservative says, well, it's not workable and it's going to end badly. Another person says, well, you got to do something. And they tend to oppose each other and then say nasty things about each other. So on these kind of given issues, I find myself typically, center left, center right on a given issue. On some issues, I lean left, some issues I lean right. But whenever I find myself leaning one direction in a political debate, I make sure to try to lean into how the other side understands themselves. Not how I understand them, but how they understand themselves, and not understand other people through the prism of how I see things. And then, of course, we can do this in our day-to-day lives as well. When things happen, the prism of our inner life asserts itself, and it makes a kind of a claim to omniscience. I know what happened. I know what others think. I know what other people do. I know why they do it. And we don't have to look very hard at the fact that our unconscious ego selves produce a running language oftentimes of condemnation of other people. So one skill I want to share with you is to be very alert for any negative language produced by the unconscious ego self. And I'm not saying change your mind, change your opinions, change how you see the world. What I'm saying is change the tone of your thinking. Now, if you change the tone of your thinking, you might actually come to different conclusions, maybe even better conclusions. But I'm not saying we should all just agree with the other person, then we're back where we started. If all of these people agree with this people, and they were those people, we're just back to the starting place. So I'm not saying that. I am saying to detoxify or purify or get the chametz out of our thinking system that I'm going to call that combination of the conscious higher self and the emerging authentic self. I hope I'm not making this initially complex, but I think the higher self in a way is coaxing the authentic self into being as they both work in concert to detoxify or purify the inner life. So that's one idea I wanted to give you. It certainly connects with our Torah portion. The rabbis love that faint phonetic play, mitzorah, the person afflicted with tzarat, and motzira, which means to emit something evil. So the rabbis cannot resist wordplay. So if mitzorah, a person afflicted with skin disease, sounds like motzira, someone who emits something evil, the rabbi said, okay, this is the parsha for Lashon Hara, and I'm going into not only don't get in the habit of saying negative things, try to be as judicious and fair-minded as possible. That's not a bad thing. You can say what you need to say, but in the most judicious, fair-minded, precise way imaginable. And you might have to work to get there. I'm going to the inner life tradition saying, and even do that in your inner life. So I'm putting an end to that little paragraph of my thought. I want to give one other paragraph on spiritual liberation. And I remember when I was a young person trying to figure these things out. I think I was all of 21 years old. I remember sitting down, somewhere near a tree over in Okinawa, and trying to figure out, what is this thing called life? What's the mystery? What am I supposed to do? what do I really want from life? And I thought, and I thought, and I thought, and I looked at my past, and I came up with it. And I thought to myself, I want to be happy. Now, that is one of the worst things you can possibly think, is that you want to be happy. Because if you want to be happy, forget about it. You will never live a fulfilled life. So if I ever wasn't happy, something was wrong with them or with me. So I quickly disabused myself of the notion. And thank God this book came along in 1978, before I was a complete goner. Road less traveled. I mentioned last week, if people say, well, what should I study if I want to study every day? You can start here and spend a year studying every page and every word of this book. And I want to remind you of those of you who have read it. I assume that might be the common denominator of everybody who comes to Oratora, is that we've all read this book or heard about this book. M. Scott Peck says the following: what makes life difficult is the process of confronting and solving problems is a painful one. Problems evoke in us frustration and grief, sadness, loneliness, guilt, regret, anger, fear, anxiety, anguish, and despair. Those are the real problems of life. So if I want to be happy, I don't want to feel these things. But if I want to live an authentic life, not only must I feel these things, I must make sure I'm not avoiding them. I must take them out from where they hide and bring them into my conscious mind and work them through. From a Hasidic perspective, these are sparks in the husk that are yearning to be redeemed by our conscious mind. Each one of these is a husk that contains within it a holy spark. And I just want to give one last line here that there's so many things I want to teach about this tonight, but he quotes Carl Jung and says, a little bit in a grandiose way, page 17, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Now, I don't believe that, but I think it's just about a little bit true. If you don't want to feel those terrible things, you make up a world so you don't have to confront the list that I just read. And then the neurons in your brain assemble around deceit, assemble around inauthenticity. And if you've ever had those moments when you've gone deep and deep and deep and you really examined yourself and you say to yourself, wow, I've been living a deceit my whole life. I've been telling myself a story my whole life and I never, ever got it straight. That's a humbling moment. When I've had that moment, I really shuddered to think that I did that and then asking, am I doing it now? So part of what Pesach is, the rabbis love to play Pesach, the speaking, Pesach, the mouth speaks, is to go in and hear those inner stories, hear how our inner lives might be avoiding legitimate suffering. We might not want to admit, as M. Scott Peck says, that life is a series of problems that we have to address. And if we don't address it, we create neurotic suffering. I think it's an overstatement, but we'll grant Carl Jung the permission to make overstatements. We create neurotic suffering instead of legitimate suffering. So my goal tonight was to give a little bit of backing to this term, spiritual liberation. By spiritual, at this point, I mean that there is a unique, authentic self called you, the unique you, that wants to emerge and live life in its fullness, as in an actualized way. It has one chance exactly. There's only one you in the history of the universe. And we, in our bad habits, can prevent that force, that being, from emerging into the world. We can cultivate a higher self that works in concert with the authentic self to work through our life problems legitimately, and through working through life problems legitimately, actually discover the mystery of our being. So I'll continue with some more ideas about what I mean by spiritual liberation tomorrow and in the next week or so, and hopefully this can enrich the ideas, the Passover ideas that you're contemplating as we move toward the holiday. As always, I'm happy to take a brief question or thought at this point.